A decision must be made in the life of every nation at the very moment when the grasp of the enemy is at its throat. Then it seems that the only way to survive is to use the means of the enemy, to rest survival upon what is expedient, to look the other way. Well, the answer to that is survival as what? A country isn't a rock. It's not an extension of oneself. It's what it stands for. It's what it stands for when standing for something is the most difficult. Before the people of the world, let it now be noted that here in our decision, this is what we stand for. Justice, truth, and the value of a single human being.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Oh, hi, this is John Roca. I'm a voiceover artist, writer, producer, host, blah, 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 everything here in Los Angeles. And Steve, I want to commend you on the movie clip that you played at the beginning of this episode, because you always play great movie clips, so I'm just going to assume you played a fantastic movie clip, a clip from the movie before the episode starts.
So just so you all know, I have no idea what movie clip that is. Now there's some pressure.
You've never let me down before.
I looked really hard to find this one. I felt it's the perfect one to encapsulate the feeling of this film and launch you into this episode.
Yes.
So I'm really glad you liked it. And speaking of the film we're talking about today is one of, I know, your all-time favorites, is Judgment of Nuremberg. And I would tell you who stars in it, but the list is so long.
Yeah. It's distinguished. Long
this
and
is a
distinguished.
serious cast.
Yeah.
So do you remember how you first came to the film?
Oh, sure. It was something that I absolutely, I had seen it on TCM or something like that. I'd seen, and I was like, oh, this is a 3-hour thing. And I'm a massive fan of World War II movies and courtroom dramas. I'm just a big fan of courtroom dramas. So when you combine the two, I was super excited. And then when you put in Spencer Tracy, Montgomery Clift, Judy Garland, a young Maximilian Schell, William Shatner,
Richard Widmark.
Richard Widmark, because so many incredible actors.
Did you say Burt Lancaster?
I did not. Burt Lancaster, Marlena Dietrich, and what's his face from the Hogan's Heroes? Colonel Klink.
Werner Klemperer.
Werner Klemperer, yeah, Werner Klemperer, not Colonel Klink, but yeah, Werner Klemperer.
It is Colonel Klink.
He is Colonel. Okay, Colonel Klink. Who was the other guy? Schultz.
Sergeant Schultz.
Anyway, so for me, this was something I think I discovered back in the early 2000s. And it's a film that I have seen numerous times since then. And it's one I cannot resist if I'm flipping channels. And I know it's a 3-hour film, so it's a commitment, but I cannot resist it when it's on.
Yeah. Well, for me...
Yeah, Steve, what was your first experience with this?
It was last week.
What? Really?
I'd never seen it before.
For the first time?
Yeah.
And listen, I want to say this in the least offensive way possible, but you're Jewish.
That's right.
I would think this would be something you'd want to see, or was like something that was shown to you as a young child growing up with
It's funny. I was thinking about this quite a bit.
Yeah.
Is that... And I don't quite know how to explain it. So when I was a kid, I went to a Reformed temple in San Francisco, Temple Emmanuel, went to Sunday school every week, and that was everything from learning how to make bagels and singing Jewish songs and doing Jewish dances to being what I will call pretty fairly indoctrinated into a certain kind of stuff. And one of those things was watching Holocaust films, like the ones that are in the middle of this film, the real footage when I was maybe 9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And there was a lot of, and I met people that had numbers tattooed on their arms, and there was a lot of talk about the Holocaust, and a lot of remembering the Holocaust, and I never watched Holocaust films.
Oh, really?
You know, and it's funny, I don't want to say I was traumatized, because I don't feel like I was traumatized.
Well, 9 years old.
But I didn't seek it out, you know? And so what's interesting is when I first really met the woman who's going to be my wife, she had almost the opposite experience. She's Catholic, grew up in New Jersey, and although she had heard of the Holocaust, she hadn't been indoctrinated the way that I was. And so when she got to high school and then in college, and suddenly she really started to find out what it really was, she became really obsessed with it, to the point where her thesis project in theater in college was doing a play about the Holocaust that she took as this collage that she created herself, that was of all these different source materials to tell different stories from the Holocaust. And so suddenly she was like, here, help me with this.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, no, I don't really want to. You know, and I did, of course, I did help her with this.
Right.
Because I was in love with her, for one thing.
Well, there you
and
go.
I've seen Schindler's List. Have you seen Shoah? I've seen Shoah. I've seen a lot of it, but I never sought it out.
Okay.
And so this is a movie where, of course, I always knew what it was. And being a huge Star Trek fan, you know, I always knew that Shatner was in the movie. And this is definitely a movie, I think, that we've talked about, there was a time when you and I both lied about having seen movies. I'm sure I lied about having seen this one.
Sure.
You know, but then it just kind of never came up. And so, and I knew it was one of your favorites. So I kept going like, well, I'm going to watch it. And so then when you brought it up a few weeks ago, I was like, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it was 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
And I knew who the cast was. I knew a lot about the movie. I'd seen clips from the movie, but I wasn't until last week that I sat down and watched it. So this is all sort of fresh for me.
That's incredible. I am so happy to hear that the podcast motivate, like, because people always tweet at us or send us messages like, your podcast inspired me to watch the film or rewatch the film with your commentary. So to hear that this is something that inspired you to watch it, it's just a great I don't know, indirect result of this. It's such a great, good thing that could happen out of this podcast.
Honestly, one of the great things about this podcast is like, I've had several film schools now in my life. You know, I had film school and I went to film school, and then I had after film school where I did that DVD job, and so I watched movies over and over again. And then there was this moment where I went, I haven't seen all this stuff, and so I went, I'm going to watch every John Ford movie, every Fritz Lang movie, every Howard Hawks movie. And then when I started teaching film school, that was really like going to film school, because there's a difference between learning stuff and figuring out how to articulate it. So I had to study again, and doing this podcast, this has been film school.
Yeah.
You know, because every week I have to study a new film, and I've had to expand my horizons. And so, you know, it's great to be able to add a whole new film, and what a film, to that list.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about where this movie comes from, which is it starts with a television show with Playhouse 90. And the original Playhouse 90 has two of the actors that are actually in this, which is Werner Klemperer is in it, and Maximilian Schell. Yeah. And two actors that are not, the leads are Claude Rains and Melvin Douglas.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen Claude Rains do the Spencer Tracy part.
Yeah.
Man. Okay.
I'm not sure. Actually, I don't know which way it's cast. I don't know if it's Melvin Douglas as Spencer Tracy and Claude. Could be Claude Rains as Burt Lancaster.
Could be, right?
I don't. I should have checked it. Yeah.
Claude Rains could probably. Yeah. Okay.
Two great actors, and it was directed by George Roy Hill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
From
George Roy Hill is
The Sting, right? Didn't
Sting and Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Yeah, and he was a TV director. He's one of those guys like Sidney Lumet, you know, all those guys that started off as TV directors.
Right.
And Katharine Hepburn saw the TV program and loved it, and she brought it to Spencer Tracy. And Spencer Tracy said, well, if I'm going to do this, I have to do this with Stanley Kramer, who I've had this long association. You know, they did 6 really powerful films with each other, and that's how this comes about.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And Stanley Kramer is one of these people they don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
His directing resume and his ability to direct a film is incredible. And to do a 3-hour film and keep people's interest is incredibly difficult. And this film really does.
Well, and he's one of these people who he was interested in issues. You know, if you look at from, first of all, he started. He was in World War II. Went to Hollywood to work there, and then that's when World War II broke out. And he ended up in the Single Corps working with Frank Capra, making films for the Army.
Right.
And then comes out of the Army and became a producer before he was a director, and produced a bunch of films, including one that we've already talked about.
Yeah, 12 Angry Men, right?
No, he didn't. He didn't produce that. I don't think so.
Okay.
He produced High Noon.
High Noon, right?
Yeah,
Great
produced
film.
High Noon, and then I think one of his first 2 movies as a director is The Defiant Ones.
Right, The Defiant Ones.
And this is the thing that you're going to see from Stanley Kramer. Stanley Kramer wants to talk about issues. And one of the reasons I think Stanley Kramer wants to talk about issues is these films from the Holocaust that we're going to talk about later. He saw them when he was a lieutenant in the Army.
Wow.
And it had a profound effect on him.
Steve, I can't recommend this Netflix show enough to you. 5 Came Back.
It's fantastic.
Right? Have you watched it? Okay, okay, good. Because you get real indoctrinated into what they experienced there in World War II and what they were able to do with their film work. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And Stanley Kramer, you know, he goes on to do... He also, by the way, he produced Champion, which is the first big Kirk Douglas movie. He produced The Men, which is Brando's debut on film. So obviously he had an eye for talent.
Sure.
Directed The Defiant Ones, which is Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
Again, about issues. And then this association with Spencer Tracy, including Inherit the Wind, which
I love.
I do too. It's a trial movie.
It is.
I watched it maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I didn't love it as much as I did the first time.
But once again, I'm an addict to these things when they're and Gene Kelly is like sticks out like a sore thumb in that movie. Unfortunately, because Gene could act, but he sticks out like a sore thumb in this movie because everyone else is taking it really seriously. And if you haven't seen it, it's one of Frederick March's most incredible performances.
He's great
on this side of The Best Years of Our Lives, and then Spencer Tracy, just amazing as Clarence Darrow.
Well, it has exactly what we like in this film, which is that we're going to deal with ideas.
Yes,
and we're going to deal with them in a way that's going to be not easy.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like there's some trial films which is we're going to find the bad guy, and that bad guy is the bad guy. And there's some trial films which the purpose of them is to make you think.
Yeah.
And that's what this is.
And those are my favorite, the complexity, the complex ones,
Well, that's why you love 12 Angry Men.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
Very
it's
true.
that you want that thought process. And he does It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
One of my favorite comedies ever. Spencer Tracy again.
I've actually never seen it.
What?
Yeah.
We are doing that for the Cine-Files.
I mean, I think I've seen big hunks of it, but 30
you gotta
years
see
ago.
it all. It's an all-star comedy.
I know
film.
what it is.
It's got a Criterion edition. It's that damn good. So yeah, it's a great.
I love that for you. The Criterion that's the stamp of approval.
Of course it is.
Those are just some dudes that run a company.
No.
Okay.
Every one of those films are elite.
You know what?
Elite.
Someday people will say it's on a Cine-Files. It must be good.
Let us hope so.
And then, of course, his final film and Spencer Tracy's final film, as well as one we haven't done on the show, but we certainly talked about a bunch, which is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Right.
It's the same thing. We're going to deal with an issue, we're going to jump into it, and we're going to deal with it in a big way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so many stars in this film that we're not going to give backgrounds on all of them.
No.
It's a 3-hour movie. It's going to take a long time. But I feel like we should take a little bit of time for Spencer Tracy.
Sure.
So when I was in film school, one of my teachers was Eddie Dmytryk. Okay. And Eddie Dmytryk is he was one of the Hollywood 10. He was a great golden age director. He directed Caine Mutiny, he directed Bogart, and he directed Brando, he directed Marilyn Monroe, and and Spencer Tracy was his favorite actor. Now, he was my teacher, he was like 96, and he wasn't entirely all there. But he said that Spencer Tracy was by far the greatest actor of all time.
Wow.
And I hear this a lot. And what's interesting when you watch Spencer Tracy, he's not doing anything.
Yeah.
And what he said, the famous quote from him is someone says, to him, I want Mr. Tracy, I want to be an actor. And he said, well, don't ever let anyone catch you at it.
That's a great quote.
Yeah. Is that his whole thing was to do almost nothing.
Yeah.
Is that he might be the best listener of any actor I've ever seen and the best reactor.
That's a great point. I mean, when you watch the older films that he was in, like Boys Town and I think San Francisco.
Yeah.
He's a little more reactionary, but I think that's him figuring it out still. Yeah. And then he becomes what you're talking about as he progresses through his career and really embraces it in the latter half of his career. So much so because he has this undeniable warmth.
Yeah.
And for lack of a better term, gravitas that attracts you and keeps you riveted to what he's doing. And like, you're always 1 second away from a tear with him, like as you're watching him,
right?
Because he just really conveys this lived in. I always consider him America in my mind when I see him. It's the country of America in one human being, like in terms of the years and everything like that. Yeah.
And he has a wisdom,
yes,
and a humbleness. And he cogitates,
yes,
and he contemplates, and he's warm, as you said, and he's just real.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is a guy who's really going through what this is.
I think that's the number one thing, Steve, real.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
He's just real. Should we get in the movie?
Sure, let's do it.
We open with German music,
yes,
and a building, and a swastika. Mm-hmm. And we watch that for a while, and then the swastika blows up.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good opening.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a James Bond opening without having all the action around. It's just boom, Now we got your attention.
Yeah, and it tells you this is where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we go into seeing post-war Nuremberg. And that's the real footage. Those are the real destroyed buildings. And it is shocking to see. You know, what has actually happened there. And we arrive with Spencer Tracy in a car, and he's looking at the destruction. He says, I didn't know it was so bad. Which I think is what all of us would say when we see that moment.
Well, because at that time we don't have, like we had in Vietnam, where we had film directors shooting footage of battle so that we had it on broadcast to our TVs at home. Back then, all it was pictures or news articles. And there's nothing on the written page rather, that will take the place of you going and viscerally seeing devastation and heartache.
Absolutely true. He arrives at the mansion, and there we meet William Shatner.
Yes.
Captain Byers, this is Judge Haywood. Byers here will be your aide. My what?
Clerk, general guide, liaison, any capacity you wish to use me.
So I have to say, because I hadn't seen this, I'd seen clips, but I hadn't seen this before. Man, if he didn't become Captain Kirk, he's a star.
He is a star.
The charisma, good-looking charisma coming off that guy. He's charming. He just shines in every moment.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm biased because I'm such a Star Trek guy, but man, he seems like a star.
But you see the Kirk, right?
Yeah.
It's
of
there.
course.
That swagger, that confidence, that smirk, it's all there.
Yeah. Tracy meets the staff. Already you can see he's uncomfortable. They give him a tour of the mansion, and you can see he doesn't really want this.
It's a lot of hullabaloo for a guy who doesn't like to have any hullabaloo around what he does, you know?
Well, and particularly if you've just seen the devastation of the city and you're like, wait, why do I have to have this? You know, he just wants to be a judge. He doesn't want to be called sir. He wants to be like, I'm just a judge. And you get that sort of Spencer Tracy,
yes,
I'm plain folk, you know, sort of thing.
But I also think it's symbolic because the Germans, after the war was over, the ones that had cited or had done the stuff or were part of this Nazi movement and felt guilty, overdid it in making up to people who came to visit and be like, you know, we see throughout the movie Marlene Dietrich trying to constantly say, we didn't know, you know, do you think we would have done these things? Do you think it's always trying to overcome or overcompensate for what they've done. And this is a natural human reaction. And so to me, that's what I see when I'm seeing all that at the beginning.
Well, and the hard thing is it overcompensating or is it just compensating?
Oh, possibly. Sure.
You know, because it's like what has been revealed to all these people and what some of them may or may not have known about, and this is what we're going to get into in the film, is the Holocaust.
Yep.
And so now this man who is there to judge Germany, essentially has come into the house. How do you behave in front of that person? That's hard.
Right.
And he tries to put them at their ease.
He does.
And we sort of find out, we get some exposition that the big trials already happened, is that we've already tried, you know, Hitler and Himmler and all those guys killed themselves, and then I think Goering and Hess and some of the other guys were on the first big Nuremberg trial, and that's done. Yeah. And I think the choice not to do that movie is very smart.
Absolutely.
Yeah, is that because that's not what this is about.
That's an easy one to do.
Yeah. In fact, Spencer Tracy's speech at the end says that would be easy.
Right.
You know, but this is now we're going to do the hard stuff, which is like the middle managements, the doctors and the lawyers and the judges. And Spencer Tracy is particularly interested in the judges. That's something he says.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very smart filmmaking choice. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Because we are going to sit in judgment. We, the audience. Yeah. We're going to be judges now.
Right.
And we're going to judge judges. And we're going to judge judgment. And we're going to judge what is justice.
Yeah.
There's a lot that we're setting up to get into.
Absolutely.
We move into the first tribunal, the first scene in the court. And they actually, by the way, wanted to shoot in the actual Nuremberg court in Nuremberg. Oh my God. But that's a court that's working every day, so they couldn't do it. So they go over and they measure every chair, every detail, photograph every piece of furniture, and reconstruct it exactly in Hollywood.
Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, wow. All the exterior shots, that actually is shot in Nuremberg.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But the court, they just rebuild it entirely.
That's amazing because it feels very authentic.
Yeah. We see the prisoners enter. We see the judges enter. We see, this is a really smart thing that they do, is the translation.
Yeah.
Is they show you very clearly this is the mechanism how this works, and then later on we're going to get past it.
Right.
But they show you that we have to wait for translation. These lights that light up. People have headphones on, and they're waiting and listening, and then they're speaking. It's very, very smart.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Good filmmaking.
We start meeting our defendants, and of course, when he walked out, Colonel Klink, I went, "Oh, it's Frederick Kipling," because I watched Hogan's Heroes all the time. As a
course.
kid. And I did look in very quickly because I thought this was true, which is that he is Jewish.
Yes,
his father's Jewish. They escaped the Nazis in 1935. Came to L.A. His father was Otter Klemperer, who was the conductor of the L.A. Philharmonic. Wow. Yeah, and Werner went and studied acting at the Pasadena Playhouse and acted in all this stuff. And it's just interesting to me that this guy of Jewish descent, whose family fled the Nazis, is going to spend a lifetime playing Nazis.
Hey, got to pay the bills, Well, but it's an iconic thing because what he does with Hogan's Heroes is he makes fun of that, you know, and I think that helps a lot. But what he does here is obviously a lot more darker.
It's really dark.
Yeah.
It's really dark. We have a couple of other defendants, and then there is Burt Lancaster.
Oh, man.
So I really like Burt Lancaster a lot. I'm sure we'll give biographical information on him on other movies down the line. But watching this, man, maybe this is his best performance.
This is, and I was watching it again like a couple of weeks ago. It is essentially Moonlight Graham 30 years before. Like what he does is Moonlight Graham in Field of Dreams. That kind of portrayal, that kind of delivery is there already way back when in Judgment at Nuremberg. And I don't mean in the terms of the nicety or that he's a good guy. Right. I just mean that the movement and the pace and because he's only in his 40s when he's doing this part of this older judge. But you can feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. And the same thing with Spencer Tracy. He also is listening, observing, watching, because he is such a powerful presence. He does not need to do much.
Well, and you think about how they pitched this to Burt Lancaster.
Yeah.
You're going to come in and do this part, and you're going to have to be there for a long, long time. It's not like you're flying in, doing 3 days, and leaving. Right. You're going to be there a lot, and you are going to sit in silence and react and watch. And then you're going to knock the doors off down the line. But mostly his silent, powerful, sad, complicated, as you say, the weight of the world, his presence throughout this is amazing.
Well, his journey as a character is amazing for us to watch, too. Yeah. Because we can't help but, and that's brilliant casting. We can't help but feel sympathy for Burt Lancaster because as American audiences, we're used to seeing him as the hero in numerous films. Yeah. And so to cast him as this person, we immediately go to this place of like, I want to forgive him. I want to forgive him because I don't see him handing out the sentences. And then later when you hear about what he did, and then he has this fantastic speech, and he goes up against Maximilian Schell later on, and then tries in the last scene with Spencer Tracy to almost worm his way out of it. There in that moment, you almost feel guilty for having felt warmth for him or wanted to forgive him, and that's powerful, man.
Well, and I think what you say
takes a great actor.
Absolutely, and I think what you say is so important, which is that, and I think this is true of Maximilian Schell, which is that the heavy lifting this movie has to do is have you feel warmth for them. Yes. Because everything, this is a movie takes place in 46. The movie is made in 61. That's not long after the war. And the basic feeling about Nazis is they're the bad guys. Right. And so this movie has to make you feel something for them first. Yep. If it doesn't, you're not going to engage in the really complex moral dilemma that the movie's going to present. Absolutely. You're not going to be able to.
That's why you need someone like Burt Lancaster to anchor those guys.
Yeah. And right now we meet Maximilian Schell, and this is his first real film. Yeah. And he's from Austria, by the way. And the first thing we find out is that Ernst Janning, which is the Burt Lancaster character, doesn't want him. No. Doesn't want him. He doesn't want a lawyer to represent him.
He wants to take the hits and because he feels guilty for what he's done. He knows that what he did was wrong. And so he does not want someone to step in and defend him and get him a lesser sentence because he's a judge. He knows what he did. And he almost just wants to throw himself at the mercy of the court and have whatever happen.
He says something you probably remember better than I do, but he says something like, I don't recognize your right to judge me. Doesn't he say something like that?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of not sure where he is.
Yeah, initially.
Right. We don't, which maybe that's just trying to set up some mystery for it too. We have Richard Widmark, who's our prosecutor. And I would say it's the opposite. In general, you don't like him.
No, Richard Widmark almost always plays villains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, here we have the Americans were working hard to have you not like the prosecutor, and we're kind of working hard to have you like the Germans, and that's setting up some of this.
But I love Widmark's character, too, because he is prone to these outbursts. He's prone to drunkenness. He's prone to... So he's not this, like, angelic, good guy creature. He has his faults as well, and his zealousness... is zealous to get these people convicted at times overwhelms you because you start to fudge the lines between good and evil in how he's behaving at times. I never think he veers into evil, but his desire to get them punished is almost matched by what we hear these judges did or these doctors did themselves in their zealous pursuit to be accepted in Nazi Germany.
Well, I think this is one of the questions of the film.
Yeah.
Is there a point at which you should throw off the rules of justice and the law in order to get the bad guys, or is it more important to always obey the rule of the law, knowing that means some people could go free?
Yeah.
You know, and we're certainly going to wrestle with that.
Yep.
Because when Richard Widmark, I think his name's Lawson, Colonel Lawson,
Colonel Lawson,
when he gives his first opening statement, it's pretty brutal.
It is.
They share with all the leaders of the Third Reich responsibility for the most malignant, the most calculated, the most devastating crimes in the history of all mankind.
Well, that's why he's a great choice as an actor for this part, because you want to feel both sides of it with him, you know?
And then it's time for Maximilian Schell.
Yeah.
And he shines, and we should say he's going to win the Oscar for this.
Yes, as damn well he should.
And this is his first movie. And
that's insane to win.
Do you know who wanted to play this part? Actually, I shouldn't say that. It might not be his first movie.
Okay.
It's his first big movie.
Right, absolutely his first big movie. But still to win it.
Yeah.
No.
Brando.
Oh, no. It would not have worked. I'm sorry, it would not have worked.
Could you imagine you're Stanley Kramer, it's 1961. Yeah. Brando is as big a star as you could possibly have.
Coming off a streetcar, coming off of On the Waterfront, yeah.
And he comes and says, I want to play this part. And you say, no, I'm going to cast this guy who's on the TV show. That's some huevos.
But it's also knowing what works. Like you mentioned earlier, Stanley Kramer knows talent when he sees it. And he knows Brando. He gave Brando his first shot in The Men, right? So he knows what to use him. Right. He knows when to use him, when not to use him. He knows he's not the right, because Brando will overshadow Burt Lancaster. He will overshadow these judges. Maximilian Schell is earnest. He is driven. He wants to defend. And because he's Austrian, the accent is already there. Brando's history of accents isn't the most, the best history of accents. So to see what Maximilian Schell does with this, because he's so much skinnier and so much more like an underdog, that helps the movie as well.
And Brando's powerful.
Yes.
I mean, it's not that he doesn't have vulnerability. He does. But what Schell does, what Schell does is amazing. He starts off and you can see his nervousness.
Yes.
Like you can see the weight of what he's about to do coming on. And then you see him say, this is a tough job.
Yeah.
Die gesamte zivilisierte Welt
The entire civilized world
wird diesem Prozess folgen.
will follow closely what we do here.
Denn es ist kein gewöhnlicher Prozess
For this is not an ordinary
in
trial,
seinen üblichen abgesteckten
by any
Grenzen.
means of the accepted parochial sense.
The civilized world will follow what we do here. That's how big this is.
He's trying to put the guilt or the weight of it on the judges to ask essentially for mercy by saying, like, you will influence people to be prejudiced or biased against Germans, against people, if you impose too harsh of a sentence.
And there's this moment he's speaking German and we're hearing the translation and the camera zooms in.
It's great technique.
And then suddenly we hear it in English.
Yes.
Is broader than the visiting of retribution on a few men. It is dedicated to the reconsecration of the Temple of Justice.
And I always loved it in Hunt for Red October, where they do almost exactly the technique. And I thought, man, John McTiernan, he invented this great way of switching translation. And of course, I never knew it's from Judgment of Nuremberg.
Yeah.
And we go into English.
How great.
And it's funny, like this idea, because it's one that we face today and continue to face, of how do you treat the fallen enemy? Lincoln wanted to forgive the South, basically.
Yeah, that's what Reconstruction was all about.
Well, it wasn't, because he was assassinated, and then Johnson and the radical Republicans, they didn't want to forgive the South at all.
Yeah.
And some people say the reason that there is to this day conflict between the North and the South of the United States was because if Lincoln hadn't been killed, things might have gone better. Or
Way to go, John Wilkes Booth.
yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks a lot, dude.
And then, Nelson Mandela, his philosophy was truth and reconciliation. We're going to say the truth. There's going to be an apology, and we're going to forget about it.
Yeah, and you don't hear the same stories coming out of South Africa that you've heard from our history because of Lincoln's assassination. Mandela stayed alive, and he dragged that country into forgiveness, including divorcing his wife, who did not want to follow his idea of forgiveness and reconciliation.
Yeah. Maximilian Schell quotes Oliver Wendell Holmes, a famous Supreme Court justice, who he's going to quote later in a not so nice way. And then he starts to talk about Ernst Janning, Burt Lancaster. And he's building this guy up to be kind of a hero,
Of course. If you were going to choose any one of those people to build up, it's going to be Ernst Janning.
Yeah, which I got to feel like if I'm one of those other defendants, I'd be going like, hey, hold on. Aren't you supposed to be defending all of us?
Yeah, but clearly, they're a little indefensible at times.
Yeah, and he talks about, basically sets up that this was a great judge. This is a man who believed in justice, believed in the democratic process, believed in the law, and that he was a really important man. And that what do you do when the country goes a certain way? Your job is to follow the law. And if the law says to do this, are you supposed to fight against the law? That's not what a judge is supposed to do.
A judge does not make the laws. He carries out the laws of his country. The statement, my country, right or wrong, was expressed by a great American patriot. It is no less true for a German patriot.
And you get into this idea of my country, right or wrong.
Well, what do we hear all the time with these activist judges? We hear that phrase all the time over the last few years. This is essentially not an activist judge because he follows along with whatever the policy is and against his better judgment. And that's where it is. And it's a great thing that he builds up Janning this way because it causes you as the viewer to be like, well, yeah, can my whole life, if I've done all this good things in my life, can I be judged for only 2 years of my life or 3 years of my life where I had to do this and I hid behind the idea that it was because the government told me that I had to and I had to stay alive, self-preservation, maybe I had no other option, those kinds of things. And so how do you balance the scales of justice in that?
Yeah. This is what we're going to spend a movie figuring out.
Exactly.
There's a great quote I love that applies to this, which is from Patrick O'Brien, who wrote all the Aubrey Maturin Master and Commander books, my favorite books of all time. Yeah. Which I've thought about wanting to do that movie, except that I it might be too big for me because I've read the 20 books over and over again.
Fair enough.
That's a lot. But the quote is that that often people put it between two choices: my country is always right, which is infantile,
yes,
or my country, right or wrong, which is infamous.
Oh, nice. I like that.
That is a good quote.
That is a powerful quote. I like that.
It certainly applies to this.
Yeah.
And then Maximilian Schell wraps up with, it's not only Ernst Janning that is on trial here, it is the German people.
Yeah.
And that is the end of that first tribunal. So we set up quite a conflict here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we go into the judges' quarters, and we kind of hear a little bit about the judges. But Tracy is really interested in this Ernst Janning guy and wants to see his writings and his books and find out. He needs to learn stuff. And already we kind of like this Spencer Tracy guy.
Of course.
Yeah.
If he's going to pass a judgment, you want your judge to look at everything, all the evidence, and so he can make a very informed decision.
Right. He decides to go out for a walk. And again, we see more of the German world. It's a very strange moment where he's getting some food from a food vendor and there's a woman there. And you're going, is she flirting with him? Is she a prostitute? But then she says, bye, Grandpa, or something.
Right. Which I think is brilliant.
Yeah. And he walks through where the Nuremberg rallies were held.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm pretty sure Indiana Jones got his book signed by Hitler. Obviously, this is a site of one of the most important moments in the Nazi regime, the Nuremberg Rallies. This is where they launch into what they are going to be.
And is this where Triumph of the Will is shot, these Nuremberg Rallies that Leni Riefenstahl
That's what this is.
Yep.
Yeah. And the thing we had to say, there's a lot of things we have to say about the Nazis, and one of them is they knew how to stage a show.
Yeah, Lord, didn't they?
Yeah. They had a good sense of style.
They understood.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate truth, but they understood how to rally people. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's this moment where he's standing there in the empty place and he looks up to where Hitler was speaking from and hears the voice of Hitler.
Vor uns liegt Deutschland, in uns marschiert Deutschland und hinter uns
I don't think any other actor does this as well as Spencer Tracy does. Yeah. And then we go to Maximilian and Burt Lancaster.
Yeah.
And there's just this moment of saying, I took the case to represent you, you know, and I'm going to do it with dignity, and it's really important, and we got to deal with some of these things, and that basically he's a fan.
Yeah.
He loves Janning.
Right. And Janning allows himself to be taken up by Maximilian Schell, because Maximilian Schell's desire and love for him allows him to put down his walls and let him represent him. It's a cautious representation.
It's pretty cold, man.
Yeah,
I mean, there's not a lot. He didn't give him a lot.
No, but he doesn't say no.
He doesn't
and
say
that's
no.
enough for him. Yeah.
Yeah. We're back in the courtroom. And the first person to take the stand is this professor. It's basically Burt Lancaster's mentor.
Yeah.
And he first starts with saying that, you know, Janning has this great intelligence, great legal mind. And this is also, by the way, where I start to really notice the camera moves. And this is the one thing that I don't think I love about the film.
Okay.
Is that there's two kinds, basically there are a lot of kinds of camera moves, but there are two different categories. And one is what we call motivated and unmotivated.
Okay.
And what a motivated camera move is that if you were to get up and walk over and grab something to drink and walk back and the camera moved with you, that's motivated.
Right.
Because your action made the camera move.
Yeah.
If I suddenly look to the right and the camera whip panned over the right, that's a motivated camera move because my look brought the camera move.
Right.
If you and I are having a conversation, the camera leaves us, goes into the other room and zooms in on, you know, a toaster, that would be unmotivated. And what unmotivated camera moves make you aware of the camera.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with them. And there's lots, like Quentin Tarantino loves unmotivated camera moves, really big on, and that's fine. This movie has a lot of them, and they're very conscious. I'm very aware of these horizontal camera moves. I'm very well of the use of the zoom. I'm very aware of like the framing. It really, really is noticeable.
Yeah.
So,
but this is because you are a director, so you know these things to use. And I'm not, you know, denigrating you feeling this way.
I feel denigrated.
Yeah. I'm just saying. It's like when I talk to Matt Nost about comedy. Matt hates almost all comedies because he can see the beats coming because he's a comedian.
Right.
And it frustrates him because he really wants to love comedies. And the ones that bust through that and get to him, he really adores because of that. So it's probably the same situation with you, Steve. You can see these things.
Yeah. I'm curious what other people might think about it, if it's noticeable now that I've said it.
It never bothers me.
Yeah.
But I could totally understand why it would with you.
It doesn't bother me. It's just like, oh, that was a little, I'm noticing. I'm just noticing
It's
it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in the movie.
Right.
And what they kind of explain is that the judges were independent before the Nazis, very much like our judges.
Yeah.
And then after the Nazis came, they became sort of subject to the protection of the Nazi regime.
Right.
And that things had to change. And that they eliminated the appeal process, they eliminated the Supreme Court, or they replaced the Supreme Court, and suddenly race was made a legal concept for the first time. And that's, yeah, indeed.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what Spencer Tracy interrupts, because he has this ability, and says, well, did the judiciary protest?
Right.
Did the judges protest? And this is really one of the key questions. Did you say no?
Yeah.
You know?
Did you at least try to say no?
Yeah.
But this is also another question, Steve, too, is like, not everybody could flee. Not everybody could leave, right? If you were going to stay, and you have to ask yourself, those of you listening to us right now, ask yourself, would you sacrifice your life in this situation? Would you sacrifice the lives of your kids, the lives of your family, or would you go along just to survive, just to endure, just to fool yourself that there's a way out of this? I don't know.
Well, and I think
that's what's fascinating about the movie.
There's an additional question that's maybe even more difficult, because it's like the frog in the pot of boiling water, is that when things are changing slowly over time, you know, and you see one thing happen and you go, well, maybe that's not so bad. You know, do I want to lose my career over just, it will go back to the normal thing soon, you know, and then another one, and then another one. And now, and because at the beginning, I don't think they knew they could get killed.
Right.
And they probably couldn't. But 3 years in, they could.
Yeah.
And by that time, things had changed so much. But that, you know, it's because you have to remember, like, the Nazis take power in 1933. And they invade Czechoslovakia, I think, in 1939. That's 6 years.
Right.
That's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
It happens really quickly, the change. And then we get to the cross-examination.
Yeah.
You know, this guy's pretty much said that he let the Nazis do everything they wanted. And in comes Maximilian Schell. And this is what you want in a good trial thing, is that you're with this guy 100%. And then you listen to Herr Rolf, I think is his name.
Yeah, Herr Rolf, yeah.
And by the end of it, you're kind of like, man, that guy made some good points.
Did you ever swear to the civil servant loyalty oath of 1934?
Everyone did.
We are not interested in what everyone did. We are interested in what you did.
Everyone swore to it. It was mandatory.
Yes. But you are such a perceptive man, Dr. Wieck. You could see what was coming. You could see that National Socialism was leading Germany to disaster. It was clear to anyone who had eyes and ears. Didn't you realize what it would have meant if you and men like you would have refused to swear to the oath? It would have meant that Hitler could never have come to absolute power. Why didn't you? Dr. Wieck, why didn't you?
Which is why the film is great.
Yeah, because this professor, this old guy, well, he left. He wasn't really there. So how did he know exactly what was happening?
Right.
And what exactly was he doing? And you say that there were sterilizations, but did you see them? Sterilizations weren't invented by the Nazis. This is something that's been done all over the world, including, and then he reads this quote of, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough.
Yeah.
And that quote is from our friend Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Wow.
Supreme Court Justice.
Yeah.
And this is true. There was forced sterilization in the United States in the turn of the century.
Yeah.
And it's something we don't talk about anymore.
I'm not surprised.
Yep.
We were ignorant of a lot of things. Using leeches, we were ignorant. Dribbling holes in brains and like if you go back and listen to or read what medicine was trying to do back then, you're just like unsettled by the decisions. But they didn't have but they had limited knowledge.
But this is fundamentally, this is not a medical process.
Well, sterilization is a medical process.
Sure, but the trepanning the brain was to relieve pressure on the brain. Sterilization is taking a person saying you're too stupid to have kids and putting them in a jail cell and forcing them to have a vasectomy.
Oh no, I'm not talking about what you're talking about with the brain. I'm saying they did that sometimes as lobotomies, like those kinds of things.
Sure, that's true.
Because they couldn't handle, they didn't understand how to handle mental illness.
Yes,
so
okay,
they did that,
makes a
and
good
that's what.
point.
So
Yes.
it's mental sterilization.
That's a good,
is what I'm getting.
No,
at.
you're totally right. I misunderstood you.
No worries. Yeah.
So you didn't feel disparaged. Okay.
Not at all.
There'll be no disparagement on the Cine-Files.
Not the Cine-Files.
Max really kicks some ass. He wipes the guy out.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Even though you can see through his points, he does wipe the guy out.
But it gives you a moment pause.
Sure.
I mean, when you hear that Oliver Wendell Holmes thought that forced sterilization is okay,
right?
And that because the point is, what is the judge supposed to do?
Right.
You know, is that it's not because if the law says this is what it is, the judge's job is to interpret the law. Mm-hmm. It's not to rewrite the law,
right,
or fight against the law, or is it? Well, that's something we're going to get into.
Exactly.
And then things get a little bit out of hand. Widmark objects, and finally Tracy shuts the whole thing down.
Order! This tribunal will admonish both counsel. It will tolerate nothing of this kind again. We're not here to listen to outbursts of this kind, but to serve justice.
Your Honor, I made an objection.
The objection is overruled.
He overrules Widmark's objection, and this gets to this thing that goes on quite a bit, is he seems to side a lot more with Maximilian Schell than he does with Richard Widmark, and Richard Widmark, Colonel Lawson, not very happy about this.
No. Well, but also because, and that's why you cast the way you do, Widmark is so overpowering in moments. He violates Maximilian's physical space at times when he's doing these objections, going right next to him, doing those kinds of things, and he's trying to bully Maximilian Schell a little bit.
Absolutely.
And because Maximilian Schell is a thinner guy, is a younger guy, almost waifish at times, you feel sympathy for him. So that when the judge sides with him, it doesn't necessarily make you feel like, oh, he's against America or he's not listening to Richard Widmark. It's more like, give this guy a fighting chance. And we know already what Widmark is going to think and feel and say. We want to hear what Widmark has to, what Herr Rolf has to say, because Herr Rolf is going to give us the complexities of the issues.
Well, it's funny because from a character and a dramatic point of view, I think I totally agree with what you say. Yeah. But it wasn't how I was seeing it when I was watching it, because what I was seeing was Spencer Tracy's character is ruling on the law. Mm-hmm. And he is doing, it has nothing to do with America.
Right.
It has nothing to do with anything other than, was that a justified objection?
Right.
It was not, I overrule it. You know,
He's consistent.
Yeah, because he believes in the law. You know, and yet so did Yawning from his point of view.
Right.
Up to a certain point that we're going to get to. After the trial, or after that session, we're back with the judges and we hear that Spencer Tracy has now read a bunch of these books and really admires this guy and wants to know how could this guy have gone from being hopeful and believing in the law to helping the Nazis.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a tough one to figure out. Back at the mansion, we meet Marlene Dietrich.
Oh, the great Marlene Dietrich.
Yeah. It's funny because another movie we talked about, Touch of Evil, is only a couple years from here.
Yep.
And she looks entirely different. Those are two totally different characters she plays.
Yeah.
And she's here gathering her things because guess what? This was her house.
Yep.
Madame Berthold, this is her house. She came to get some of her belongings from the basement. I didn't know she was coming
This is my responsibility, Mrs. Halberstadt. I've been storing some of my things here until I could get a room large enough to keep them in. I hope you don't mind.
No, not at all.
You can examine what I have here if you like.
Of course not.
Then I just take these out.
Yeah.
That she had with her general husband.
Yep.
Who we found out was executed in the previous trials.
Yep.
And what she felt was incorrectly. She adamantly believes that her husband was innocent, didn't know what was going on, followed along because he had to, because he was a military man. He had to follow orders, a soldier. That's what he was. And so she has an anger towards the Americans, which she says she's gotten over, but you can tell she hasn't. And there's an anger there, and she wants and this was so interesting. The trial itself is a battlefield for numerous people in the trial for their issues.
Yep.
They have axes they want to grind, or justice they want to mete out, or forgiveness they want to have happen through what's happening in the trial. And Marlene Dietrich comes in as this other face of Germany, who the bourgeois, the rich face of Germany that was like, we didn't know. How would we have known? You know, like, how could we have known? He was a good man following orders. Why must you judge him this way? Why did you execute him? You don't know our country. How can you judge us by your rules? So it's very interesting.
Well, and she's trying to do two things at once because that is her emotional state.
Yes.
And she's trying to be nice.
Yes, she is.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And and there's this kind of awkward moment where she's in her. Can you imagine being in your house and just trying to clear out a couple of your things for this other guy who's lived there, who's part of the group of people that killed your husband?
Yeah.
That's a lot, you know? And again, Spencer Tracy is lovely and warm and kind to her.
Very kind to her, yeah.
Yeah, it helps her, sends her off with a car. And then he comes back in and he wants to ask his staff, the two servants, about her.
Yeah.
And and you know why he's doing it. And you can see that he's trying to be kind. And you can see that he sees that they are uncomfortable. And you could see why this scene, it's just horrible.
Yeah.
Because you see their pain and terror, literal terror.
Yeah.
We were not political. Mr. Halberstadt and I are not political.
No, but you must have been aware of some of the events that were going on. So.
We never attended meetings. Never.
I'm not trying to put you on trial. I'm just curious. I'd like to know. For instance, there was a place called Dachau, which was not too many miles from here. Did you ever know what was going on there?
We knew nothing about it. How can you ask if we knew anything about that?
I'm sorry.
It's not that. It's 1 year removed from the end of the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
Once the Americans leave, what's going to happen to us if we shoot our mouths off or say something untoward? And it gets back to her. Right? Exactly.
Yeah. There's also one other weird thing too, which is that the previous people who lived here, they never hung out in the kitchen and talked to servants.
That's right.
So they're very uncomfortable just with his presence, and now they feel like he's saying, were you a war criminal? I mean, this is the judge who's going to have people executed asking you how you felt about the Nazis in Dachau.
Right.
You know, that's a lot.
It is a lot. I just want to serve you grilled cheese.
And this
I don't want to know. I don't want to tell you
where they say Hitler did some good things too. You know,
but that's the ugly truth of the whole thing. And this is like I'm gonna walk a line when I say this, but this is the ugly truth of Hitler and the Nazis. If you do your history and you study the Treaty of Versailles after the end of World War I, and you see how that absolutely crippled Germany economically, militarily, their view of themselves as people, they were destroyed. it was ripe for someone to step in with a tyrannical point of view that to motivate the country to embrace itself again and find its pride in itself again. So in a way, what he did to bring pride back to the German people was good. Unfortunately, his tyrannical desires to control everything, his racism, his prejudices, this is what ends up destroying and causing the legacy to be so horrific and something we still use as a touchstone to measure evil, even in 2017. So you have to do your history. It isn't just, the Nazis were bad. Yes, they were bad, but you have to understand why they came about so it never happens again. And that's what's interesting about the film, because it's a really controversial thing to say in 1961, especially with the Red Scare. We're just out of the Red Scare with McCarthy. We're just out of what the people that got blacklisted in Hollywood. So it's a very dangerous concept to have this idea of trying to show this other side of how Hitler came to power and that he did do some good things for the country, even though he was a tyrant.
Well, I think what we have to separate out, and this is what's so hard, is we have to be smart enough to be able to say that there are things that can be admirable in a person that we despise.
Right.
For instance, I can say that Genghis Khan was a horrible person who killed hundreds of thousands or millions.
Sure.
And I can also say he was a brilliant general, that he was incredibly brilliant at moving people, at motivating people, at logistics, and that he actually was open to religions, and that there was a lot of civilization that happened because of Genghis Khan. Right. Also a horrible person.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And I can also say that if you look at what happened after the Treaty of Versailles and then into the Depression to Germany, is this was a completely wrecked country.
Yes.
And that the transformation under the Nazi regime from when they took power in 1933 to when the war started might be the most remarkable turnaround of any country in the history of the world.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I mean, it is so in terms of efficiency, discipline, organization, understanding of how the economy works, and of how to motivate people.
Yeah.
They were brilliant.
Yeah.
They were also evil.
Yes.
And some of the tools that they use to motivate people are some of the worst possible things that any humans have ever done.
Yeah.
So, but I think if we fail to separate those things out, then we're being purposely ignorant.
Yes, agreed.
Of the reality.
Simplistic.
Yeah.
And you can't be with something like this.
Yeah. Okay.
This has been a history lesson from the Cine-Files.
From the Cine-Files. Welcome to the History Files, where each week...
Oh, shit. Let's not do that as a new podcast.
So there's a podcast. If you really want that, there's a podcast. If you like our epic long, many-hour podcast, check out a podcast called Hardcore History. They are, in general, about 5 hours long each. And it's just one guy talking to you who's very smart.
Damn.
They come out every 3 or 4 months.
Oh, that makes sense.
And it is like, here's a history book. The last one I think was on Alexander the Great.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it was just like, 5 hour long.
That's fascinating.
They're great.
Okay.
But they're not for the faint of heart.
Yes.
There's a reason I listen to things at 2 times a day.
That's true.
All right, our third tribunal.
Yeah.
We start to hear about forced sterilization. We call our first witness, Rudolph Peterson, Montgomery Clift.
Dude, the reason I love this film so much, another one of the many reasons, is the film acting that Montgomery Clift and Judy Garland do in this movie, both near the tail end of their careers. And me being a massive fan of old Hollywood, knowing their history, their personal struggles, Montgomery Clift being gay in Hollywood, bisexual in Hollywood. Burt Lancaster, ironically, tore him to pieces on the set of From Here to Eternity the whole time, destroyed him emotionally. To see him in the courtroom with him is incredible if you know the history of their struggles
I didn't know that.
on that set. Yeah, if you do reading, Burt Lancaster was a complete asshole to him on that set because of his bisexual nature. Then you have Judy Garland with her struggles with drugs, her weight, drinking, her failed marriages, the stuff that she went through in Hollywood. And you see them bring this pain, this struggle, this life condition that they endured in real life to these characters. And Montgomery is from the School of Method with Brando. He was very good friends with Brando and Dean, all that. He was from that School of Method.
Three. I mean, those are the big three that come out of that school at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when you see what he does with this character as it progresses through his testimony, Jesus, it's one of the most beautiful, heartbreaking. I cry every time I watch it. Every single time. When he brings out that picture of his mother, every fucking time I cry.
My mother, what you say about her, she was a woman, a servant woman who worked hard. She was a hard-working woman. And it is not fair what you say. I want to show you. I have here her picture. I would like you looked at it. I would like you to judge. I want that you tell me, was she feeble-minded? My mother. Was she feeble-minded? Was she?
His performance is stunning and powerful and shocking.
Yeah.
And it's funny, too. I was thinking about the contrast between acting styles of Montgomery Clift and Spencer Tracy.
Sure.
Because Spencer Tracy is everything Montgomery Clift is not, and vice versa. Spencer Tracy is spare and real and simple and honest, and he's not putting any acting on it. Right. And Montgomery Clift is emotional, and it's weird, and it's uncomfortable, and it's just this whole powerful thing.
They're both real in two completely different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Because you don't walk away and go, oh, that's not real.
No.
With both of them. It's just 100% what is happening.
Montgomery is almost too real.
Yeah.
And that's what scares you.
And the story he tells is this story of a slow descent of conflict with, first there's a fight with a SA guy, and then that ends up being the guy who's trying to get his license, for some kind of license from whatever it was. And then he ends up in this trial, and then he ends up with this sentence to be sterilized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you feel sympathy for him, right? And then Maximilian Schell comes in for that cross-examination.
Yeah.
And just...
Oh, there's one more thing I want to say before they get there, because I think it's important, is that part of what they're doing is they're asking him questions, intelligence questions, which he can't answer because he's not the smartest of guys. Right. And then he tries to run away, and he comes back, and then he ends up in the hospital.
Yes.
And the doctor and the nurse tell him, we are against this. We think this is wrong.
Yeah.
But they do it anyway. That's important.
Yeah.
That's important, is that, and this is what we're talking about with the judges, we're talking about it with the German people, is I think this is wrong, but not enough that I'm going to stand up and do something about it.
The hardest thing in the world is to understand a situation like that when you yourself have never been in a situation like that. It's easy to judge those people as wrong. It's harder to understand what it would be like to be in that situation, what you would actually do. Yeah. And so you're right. And that's this theme keeps coming back over and over again. This idea of them not wanting to do something, but being forced to do so by the government, and them needing to log their protest, but still doing it anyway.
Yeah. Now we get Max. Max is going to give this cross-examination.
Oh,
it's brutal.
Just brutal. Tears him to pieces and showcases that he is not an intelligent guy.
Yeah.
And it is uncomfortable. It is painful.
Yeah.
And it is almost like Nazi Germany trying him again and finding him guilty
That's
again
exactly
for
what
sterilization.
It is. He's using the same test.
Mr. Peterson, there was a simple test that the health court used to ask in all cases of mental incompetence. Since you say they did not ask you then, perhaps you can answer it for us now. Form a sentence out of the words Hare, Hunter, Field.
Your Honor, objection.
And one of the things that's happening, by the way, Montgomery Clift, I guess at that time in his life, he had a lot of trouble with lines.
Oh.
And so what Kramer said to him...
He had his own issues with drugs and alcohol as well.
Yeah, he had a lot of issues. And what Kramer said to him, he said, listen, you know this character. You know how to be this character. Just answer the questions from the cross-examination. And that's what he did.
They had already made up. When I walked into the court, they had made up their minds. They had made up their minds. They put me in the hospital like a criminal. I could not say anything. I could not do anything. I had to lay there.
And that's what we see, is him struggling for those words and him trying to...
Yeah.
he's using it.
That's amazing.
And the performance is astounding.
Yeah.
And it gets to a really, really bad place.
Well, he devolves.
Yeah.
Right, because we want to feel sympathy for him at the beginning when he's getting all the right questions from the prosecutor, all the right questions. But when the defense attorney steps up, Maximilian Schell, Herr Rolf, when he starts to show the ugly side, the underside, the underbelly of this, that he is not intelligent. He comes from a family that is not that intelligent, that in their minds they had some kind of record and reason to do this to him. And then he pulls out this picture of his mother because he doesn't want to accept that his mother was mentally unbalanced or had mental health issues. And that's why he takes out the picture. He goes, my mother, you tell me. And they're all ashamed. Yeah. They're all ashamed because they see a man who's been broken, because he keeps saying, I was not like this until they sterilized me. You don't know what I was like. And that's what Rolf says. So
it's brutal.
Just so brutal. Yeah, he says it like,
I feel it is my duty to point out to the tribunal that the witness is not in control of his mental processes.
I know I am not. Since that day, I've been half I've ever been.
The tribunal does not know how you were before. It can never know.
And that is devastating. And like I said, I cry every time. Because I've been there. I've been in that place where you can't find your words, where you feel like people are judging you when I was younger, and you can't, and you feel like you're on trial, and you're desperate to be understood. And that's what he's trying to be, is understood and somehow find a way out of this. And it's just so brutal to watch.
Well, and two things about this. One is that in terms of the trial, what Maximilian Schell says at the end, we can't know that, is exactly right. Correct. In terms of evidence.
Yes.
And that is why it's so devastating.
Yeah.
In terms of morality, we're reasoning from a false premise.
Yeah.
Because the premise that is created is that the value of this man's life or his mother's life is determined by his level of intelligence.
Yes.
And that is wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and that is so, because when you make that argument, and you could say, and Hitler made this argument 100%, these are deficient humans.
Yeah.
They are less than normal.
They can't be part of the perfect race, the Aryan race.
We are trying to be perfect. Therefore, we must eliminate them, these eugenics.
Yeah.
And that implies that the standards by which the Nazis judge perfection are correct. And they are not. Like, one of the big things, if you watch Triumph of the Will, which is how I've watched, but it's very hard for me to watch, and you see the images of what Jews look like. Part of it was, look at these ugly, skinny, big-nosed Jews. Right. They are inferior. Yeah. And then you have the square-jawed, blonde-haired, broad-shouldered German and say, this is what we aspire to. Which is funny coming from Hitler, because he didn't look like that.
No, and nor was he fucking German. He was half Austrian.
He was Austrian.
He was full German.
And there's some rumor that he has Jewish ancestry too.
Yeah,
That's
right.
a whole other thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
But is that the implication that these two standards of physical appearance and intelligence are what creates value in a human?
Right.
And they are not. No. Humans are complicated. There are people who are not that intelligent and ugly, but are the most compassionate, loving, caring people in the world, and we need them.
Yes,
we need Montgomery Clift's mom.
Yeah,
like, fuck you, don't talk about my mom. I mean, it's so, like, this whole idea that you can create an argument and then group people into a group and say, we just should get rid of them, and everyone goes, makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, that one riles me up.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, it should rile you up.
And at this moment, Spencer Tracy adjourns the court.
Yeah.
We end up at a party, which Spencer Tracy goes to kind of reluctantly, having a little bit of political talk. I love Spencer Tracy's line where they kind of are going, how do you feel about this? And he says, I'm a rock-ribbed Republican who thought FDR was a great man. That's an amazing line, because it says, everything says that I am not on this guy's team, and yet I can admire him for being a great man. That's who we want to be a judge. Someone who has the wisdom to look beyond his own perspective. Yep. Marlena comes up, and that's when she sort of talks about that she feels her job is to introduce Americans to the real Germany.
You see, I have a mission with the Americans, as Mr. Perkins can tell you.
Well, what is that?
To convince you that we are not all monsters.
And that's when Richard Widmark shows up.
Slightly inebriated.
Slightly. And he's not a nice drunk.
Nope.
And Marlena Dietrich excuses herself, and the hatred between the two of them is so palpable.
Right.
Because now we find out that he was the prosecuting attorney.
Yeah.
That sent her husband to death.
Well, I think there's more hatred from her end than his end. His is more a matter of defensiveness. Hers is a matter of anger for taking her love away from him.
And what you start to feel from him, which we're going to get more and more into, he has deep hatred here, deep anger, and there seems to be a reason for it.
We don't know what the reason is. He's almost a zealot about it.
We shouldn't be discussing this.
Oh, no, Judge. We're fair Americans and true blue. We mustn't do anything that's out of order. No, sir, we can't do anything that's out of order. There are no Nazis in Germany. Didn't you know that, Judge? The Eskimos invaded Germany and took over. That's how all those terrible things happened. It wasn't the fault of the Germans. It was the fault of those damn Eskimos.
And then there's this announcement, hey, all the officers, you got to go home because the Soviet Union has invaded Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And this is a whole other element to the movie. So I just saw it for the first time that I didn't expect, which was putting this trial into political perspective in terms of what is going to become the Cold War, which is our relationship to Germany is incredibly important in our defense against Soviet incursion.
Right.
And therefore, what happens in this trial is going to affect geopolitics.
Well, I think this was great too, Steve, because as if this shit wasn't complex enough. Like, if this wasn't complicated enough, let's throw in the Russian situation into this as well, and communism into this, and then have him judge or hand out his sentences against that backdrop.
Yeah. And this is such big news that even in the prison with our judges, they are talking about it, and they're all having their opinions about things. And there's this great moment where Yawning, he's not talking with them.
No, of course not.
And
he's above them.
Yeah, he's a kind of superior son of a bitch.
He is an elite son of a bitch, yes.
And we're going to hear later on, he says some stuff that's sort of like, oh, wow. And he turns to Sam and says,
listen to me here, Han. There have been terrible things that have happened to me in my life. But the worst thing that has ever happened is to find myself in the company of men like you.
It's so great. It's so great.
Yeah.
You want to talk about sick burns? They used to have more class in their sick burns back then.
Dude, when one of the landed gentry burns you, it goes deep.
It's deep.
Yeah.
It's deep.
And what we didn't mention was when Marlena saw Spencer Tracy at the party, she invited him to a concert.
Yes.
And that's where we're going to get up. He goes to the concert. He's listening to the music. If you notice, the German music plays an important part in this film.
Yeah.
German singing, German folk songs, German music. It's very important. It's almost like the chorus.
To me, it's the language of the people.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That is, you feel the presence of the unseen German people through this music.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a lot of what this movie is about, is how do we feel about these people?
Right.
And he sees Marlene Dietrich. They're going to walk home. And this is where we hear about a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, her husband's death. We hear about Spencer Tracy's family. His wife died a little while ago, doesn't have children.
Right.
And then she says, do you want to come up to my place? Okay. And I love the design of her apartment, her flat, because it is, on the one hand, obviously beat up and dilapidated. On the other hand, she has worked really, really, really hard to make it clean and nice and proper.
Well, of course, it reflects her life.
Yeah.
Right? And she has that looming picture of him.
Yeah.
Of her ex, or her
husband?
Killed?
Yeah.
What am I trying to say? Executed husband. Yeah. God damn it, I'm going dumb. Yeah. That's what's happening.
Well, you've had a long day.
I'm about to get sterilized if I keep going this way. But we see the picture of we see the picture of him.
Is that still a thing?
I don't know. I'm just joking. But we see the picture of him above. And I love that because that also conveys his looming presence in her life.
No question. No, it's yeah. Can you imagine if having the hookup with the widow underneath that picture? Yeah. Maybe that joke shouldn't stay in.
Well, I think all right, but I think in a lesser film they would have had a romance, an unnecessary romance, and they
get near it.
They get near it, but it isn't quite consummated, which is great.
Yeah, and she says she's the daughter of the military. She's taught discipline.
Yes.
You know what that means, don't you?
No, I'm afraid I don't.
It means I was taught discipline, a very special kind of discipline. For instance, when I was a child, we used to go for long rides into the country in summertime. But I was never allowed to run to the lemonade stand with the others. I was told, control your thirst, control hunger, control emotion. It served me well.
And your husband? Was he of that heritage too?
My husband was a soldier. He was brought up to do one thing, to fight in the battle and fight well.
And she's asking about yawning, and he's saying, whoa, we can't discuss the trial.
Right.
And then she tells this story of Hitler coming on to Yawning's wife.
Yes.
And he cuts it in, and he says, I do not object that you are so ill-mannered. I object that you are such a bourgeois.
Bourgeois.
That is a high-class cut down.
Once again, yawning.
Yeah.
He's got a book of sick burns, man.
Yeah. I'd love to see Yawning's book of sick burns.
It's perfect.
So, and then we start hearing this name of Irene Hoffman.
Yes.
And Widmark says, okay, I'm going to go to Berlin and find him. So he's going to leave the trial. We go up to Berlin and we meet Judy Garland.
Judy Garland.
Now, she's another important figure. I know we're going to do another movie that we're going to spend a lot more time on her. There's even one, I'm not going to say. Maybe we've tried to schedule it with a very special guest to do it.
Yeah.
But it's coming up. But I will say, as you mentioned before,
yeah,
this is a person who's been through a lot. This movie is very different for her. She's remarkable in the film.
She is. And that's the thing, like, and this is not saying anything negatively, right? She had struggles with drugs and alcohol and her weight. You know, when you see Summer Stock, you see that film Summer Stock, you see she's heavier in the film. By the end of the film, she's thinner when she's doing that dance, and it's because she put herself on this crazy diet. She went back on her drugs, lost the weight because she was so nervous about that dance sequence. And so here, I love her here. She's older. She's a woman. She looks like someone who would be the housewife or the wife of the guy that you see, right? This kind of older, fatter German guy who she has that look, the lived-in look, and it's great because it really works for her because she's still so heartbreaking and broken, and it's so powerful when she gets.
And Widmark wants her to come back to Nuremberg for the trial.
Yeah, she doesn't want to initially come because she doesn't want to relive this whole thing again.
And particularly when she hears that Yawning and the Werner Klemperer character, which is Han, I think, are going to be there.
Yeah,
and yet in the end, there's one. I think Widmark says something like, "There's one person you can't let down."
Right.
You know, and she agrees.
Yeah, and her husband is great. The guy who plays the part, very supportive of her, and that's why she chose a man like that to be with, because of the horrific experience that she'd been through.
Yeah.
You know?
And then we're back on the trial. Widmark's not there yet. We're starting to hear a little bit about this case, which they call the Fedelstein case. And this is actually based on a real case, which I think it's like the Katzenberg case or something like that. And Widmark comes in, and we hear this idea of racial pollution.
Yeah.
Which is sex between an Aryan and a non-Aryan, which is punishable by death. And this is no joke. This is Nazi Germany in the 30s. You know.
30s and 40s, yeah.
Yeah. And Fedelstein was a prominent Jewish merchant. He was accused of sex with Irene Hoffman, the Judy Garland character, when she was 16. The trial was in this courtroom, right in this room. It was during the Nuremberg Rallies, so it was filled with the top Nazi all the Nazi officials were there. Han, Werner Kempler's character, was the prosecuting attorney, and Yawning was the judge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being 16? A 16-year-old girl in that situation. Imagine.
Yeah. And they call Irene Hoffman.
Yeah.
And what she says was that they were friends. That he was kind to her. That he was an older man. That he lived in the building that he owned, and that he was kind to her. You know, and then she says she was questioned alone by Han. He told her that no one would believe her. He told her that if she protected Fedelstein, that she'd be arrested, and she refused to lie.
I told him what I had said again and again. I told him that I could not say anything else. I could not lie about someone who had been so kind to me.
And she was arrested. Han ridiculed her at the trial. The audience laughed because everybody's on this bandwagon at this point.
Right.
The verdict was guilty. Fedelstein was executed, and she was sent to prison.
Yeah.
And in this whole trial, we are aware first of Han, who seems perfectly happy with what happened.
Yeah.
And then the camera zooms in to Yawning. And that face, man, there's a lot going on there.
Right.
And that this decree and then what happens that we talk about is this idea of secret arrest.
Yeah.
Is that we can now just grab someone without a trial, without anyone see it, and put them in the concentration camp. That's how the laws have now changed. And judges signed those orders.
Right.
Yeah. And Maximilian Schell does not cross-examine.
No.
He says, I would like to withhold this till later. That's not a good sign.
Yeah, we'll find out later. But yeah.
And now we swear in Colonel Lawson, Richard Widmark.
Which I thought was an interesting move. To swear in the colonel.
Because I'm seeing it for the first time, so I'm like, what is going on? What happens?
And
we know that he's been emotional.
Yes.
We know that he is angry. And we feel that there is more behind his prosecution than what we've been led to believe.
Yeah.
And now we find out because he was with the army that freed Buchenwald.
Yeah.
And now he shows the films.
The actual films.
And these are the films I saw as a kid.
Yep.
I mean, I remembered the shot of the bulldozer bulldozing the bodies into the mass grave. And I remember the images of the showers and of the soap. And I remember the train cars and all of those things. They're like really in my brain.
Yeah. Richard Widmark does an incredible job doing the voiceover for that sequence. I mean, he's obviously testifying, but the emotion behind his voice as his stops and starts in when he's talking about it is it's incredibly powerful, and you feel the weight of what he must have witnessed.
There was a motto at Buchenwald: break the body, break the spirit, break the heart. The ovens of Buchenwald, evidence of last-minute efforts to dispose of bodies. The stoves were manufactured by a well-known company which also specialized in baking ovens. An exhibit of byproducts of Buchenwald. Brushes of every description. Shoes. Adults and children. Spectacles. Gold from teeth melted down, sent once a month to the medical department of the Waffen-SS. A lampshade made from human skin. Children who'd been tattooed to mark them for eventual extermination. Sometimes mercy was shown to the children. They were injected with morphia so they'd be unconscious when hanged. The bodies of those who'd come in boxcars, without food and without air, who hadn't survived the journey to Dachau. A witness at one of the executions at Dachau gave the following description. Inmates were made to leave their clothing on a rack. They were told they were going to take baths. Then the doors were locked. Tins of Cyclone B were released through the specially constructed apertures. You could hear the groaning and the whimpering inside. After 2 or 3 minutes, all was quiet.
And here's the thing I was thinking about. So the movie that we actually did that is coming out as we're recording this tomorrow is Dr. Strangelove.
Yes.
Dr. Strangelove couldn't be a more opposite film from Judgment at Nuremberg. They came out 2 years apart. And there's a thing that we talked about in that film that reminds me of something here, which is that when Kubrick set out to make this movie about nuclear holocaust, he was trying to make a serious film. And he spent months and months and months trying to make a serious film, but he kept laughing.
Yeah.
Is that every time he would try to do the serious thing, it would become funny to him, and finally they decided to do a comedy. When we saw Montgomery Clift tell his story, we were deeply moved. When you hear Judy Garland tell her story, we're deeply moved. Because when we know how to empathize with one person, but when it comes to nuclear war, our brain shuts down in some fundamental way. And we cannot have that emotion of empathy, of being moved.
It's too big.
And so it's too big. And so Kubrick decides to make a comedy. When I see this footage, or when I visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., which I've been to, or the Holocaust Museum in Berlin I've been to, or Yad Vashem in Israel that I've been to, you walk around in sort of a stunned silence. yes, some people weep, but sometimes it's so big and so overwhelming. And the idea, and it's particularly the efficiency and the thought and the mechanization of the way people were slaughtered by the millions, that your brain stops.
Yeah.
And you're left in this not empathetic feeling, but cold and lost and empty feeling. And you watch as this footage is shown, and this footage had almost never been seen in the United States. This is the first major public showing of the real footage from the Holocaust. I mean, people knew about it.
Sure, of course.
But watch it because, you know, it'd be illegal under the Hays Code and things like that. This was a crazy because there's a lot of naked bodies and death. It's horrible. And you watch the faces of the people in the courtroom as they react to this footage.
Yeah.
And that is a profound moment in film. And it's also a moment why I kind of understand why I didn't seek these out.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't like how that makes me feel. I know that it exists. I know what happened.
Yeah.
I don't like to be there.
Well, and this is what, Steve, this is a great thing you bring up because this is what helps Karen, your wife, or me, who are not Jewish by birth or by religion. We have a separation inherent in the situation.
Right.
It's not our people necessarily that we're seeing. It's not our race. If I was seeing that, 6 million Latinos treated that way, gassed, bodies put, I would have incredibly hard time watching it. I would incredibly hard. So I would be resistant to it. My father died of cancer. I can't get involved in any cancer charities. I don't have the strength. I don't have the strength. I have tried. It destroys me every time.
Yeah.
Other charities I can get involved in. Cancer, I can't go near. It's still too close. It's still too painful. And so I understand I can understand where you're coming from and feel that, because even as a person who's not Jewish, watching that is stunned silence. When I walked through the Holocaust Museum in DC, because obviously it's where I grew up, it's
an amazing museum.
Yeah, it is. And the tunnel that you walk under, every single time, just absolute reverence and silence for these people's lives and that were taken from them in such horrific ways. And you're right. And I think that's why we go stone cold about it, Steve, is because we really come face to face with the true evil that man is capable of. Humans are capable of.
And I think on some level, it still remains beyond comprehension.
Yes.
You could know it, but not comprehend it.
And thank God, because if you can comprehend it, you can do it. And I'd rather not.
Yeah. That's the understatement of the...
I'm just saying.
And speaking of not comprehending it, we go into the prison, back with the judges.
Yeah.
And you really do feel that for the most part, this is the first time they saw it.
Yeah.
They didn't, and they're still going, that can't be right.
Yeah.
Those numbers can't really be right.
Right.
You know.
This right. And we still hear that argument now, Steve. People push back that the Holocaust never even happened. There are people who support this theory. It's because it's too big. It can't possibly be true. Human beings can't possibly do this to each other. It's too overwhelming to believe.
And yet human beings have done it to each other over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
And you know, it's like, yes, the cold mechanized efficiency of the German Holocaust. And by the way, one of the things that always bothers me is we always say, 6 million Jews. And we always forget the Romani and homosexuals and political dissidents. And the numbers are probably way up over 7 million. But it's like, but when we say the Holocaust, we don't usually talk about the Armenian Holocaust. You know, we don't, it's like we got to talk about Somalia and all these other places. We do it over and over and over again.
Yes, we do.
The Germans were particularly good at it. Like they played nice classical music as they marched people into the showers, and they gave them a ticket to get their clothes back. I mean, that is some brilliant mind fuckery, you know.
It's evil. It's pure fucking evil.
And they ask, these judges in this prison ask this guy who was at the camps, that can't really be possible to kill that many people. And he goes in this very practical,
just straightforward way while he's eating.
It's possible. How? You mean technically? It all depends on your facilities. Say you have 2 chambers that accommodate 2,000 people apiece. Figure it out. It's possible to get rid of 10,000 in a half hour. You don't even need guards to do it. You can tell them they're going to take a shower, and then instead of the water, you turn on the gas. It's not the killing that is the problem. It's disposing of the bodies. That's the problem.
And this is what people talk about when we had the Abu Ghraib scandal.
Yeah.
They no longer saw them as human beings. They were playthings because they had devolved as the guardians of these people, the guards of these people, into this mindset. And then you see that play out with this guy in the movie as he's talking about it while he's eating his food.
Yep.
That it's not the killing, it's the disposing and blah, blah, blah. You're just like, man, to boil it down to something so simplistic as if you're burying sticks in the yard or something. It's madness.
But it's an extension of the same thing that police and undertakers and ambulance drivers have to deal with, which is that humans have this weird ability to shut things off.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and to some degree, that is a useful ability.
Yeah.
And it's really scary.
Yes.
Yeah. And we go back to Marlene Dietrich and Spencer Tracy in a cafe, having what seems like a fairly nice date.
Yeah.
You know? And then, but Spencer Tracy is a little distracted because he saw those pictures. And I love what she says. Oh, Colonel Lawson's favorite pictures. That's a lot of a line.
Yeah, man.
She follows that up with, is that what you think we are?
You know?
And then she says, we didn't know.
There it is.
Yeah.
The fallback excuse. We didn't know.
And Spencer Tracy's line is, as far as I can make out, no one in this country knew.
Yes. This is an even more powerful line.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, too. One of the things that bothers her is that her husband was hung rather than put in front of a firing squad, that he did not get a military execution. This is weird, the shit that people get hung up on.
Well, it's,
you know,
she comes from a military family, so in her mind, there's a protocol.
Yeah. And as she's talking about that's what taught her what it was to hate, we hear the German song again being sung in the background.
But one can't live with hate. I know that. We have to forget. We are to go on living.
And there's this whip pan off of Tracy's look to the crowd singing. And I wanted to ask you, because you've seen this many times. Yeah. We've had this conversation. We've just seen these films of the concentration camp. We're hearing the German singing.
Yeah.
She's saying, is that how you see us?
Right.
We didn't know.
Right.
And Tracy looks around at this room of German singing. How are we supposed to feel?
For me, I've always thought this is what we must do as human beings. We move on. We have to move on. If we don't move on, we are stuck in an endless cycle. They're singing, and if I remember, there's a translation. The song they're singing is not one of.
Oh yeah, she translates it.
Yeah, she translates it, right? It's not necessarily a joyful song, right? It's about a soldier and a woman, like her soldier's going away to war.
Right.
So it's more of an honorary song to the situation and what have you. And it's remembering when there was nobility in the military. There was something.
Well, it's a romantic, sad song.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. Those are those things that you have to grab onto to move on, to move forward. It's not saying forgive us or we didn't do anything wrong. It's saying we have to move on as a people. And I think that's what you see there is this idea that no matter how terrible things are, you can still get over them and move past them. And a lot of people, to be fair, didn't know.
Of course.
And a lot of people did who claimed that they didn't.
There's a gray area. There's a gradation of, there's some people that didn't know anything.
Right.
And there's some people, when they saw people get on the train, they didn't know where they were going.
Right. But they didn't ask questions
They
either.
didn't ask questions. And the thing, and I've been thinking literally for years of how to articulate this idea, and I'm going to try to now.
Sure.
But it's the thing I felt in watching the scene and in watching Spencer Tracy watch the Germans sing, is that something that's really important to remember is that people are people.
Yes.
Is that only extraordinary people escape the world that they're in and do something completely different.
Right.
There are very few Abraham Lincolns or Walt Disney's or Steve Jobs or Adolf Hitler's or Julius Caesar's. Yeah. There are very few of them. Most people, whatever the world they're in, they kind of accept that. Yeah. And there's gradations within that. There are going to be some stronger people, weaker people, louder people, quiet people, smarter people, dumber people. But in general, they're all accepting the world.
Right.
And that the thing of like that I always feel, and I felt this in this moment, is that the lesson should be that could be us.
Yeah. Right.
They're just people.
Yep.
And that if I had been in those circumstances, only the extraordinary person stands up and says no. Most people are like that nurse and that doctor.
Yeah.
I'm against it. I think it's wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
Because that's and even saying I'm against it, I think it's wrong is almost extraordinary.
Right.
Most people just do it.
Yeah.
Because that's the world they're in. It's a powerful scene to me.
I agree.
We're back on trial. And it's funny, Maximilian starts with how shameful those films are.
Yesterday, the tribunal witnessed some films. There were shocking films, devastating films. As a German, I feel ashamed that such things could have taken place in my country. There can never be a justification for them. Not in generations, not in centuries.
But it's also unfair. It's unfair to show it.
He feels like it biases the judges to decide.
What is the prosecution trying to prove? Is he trying to prove that the German people as all were responsible for these events? Or that they were even aware of them? Because if he is, he's not stating facts. But he knows he's not. The secrecy of the operations, the geographical location of the camps, the breakdown of communications in the last days of the war, when the exterminations rose into the millions, show only too clearly that he's not telling the truth. The truth is that these brutalities were brought about by the few extremists, the criminals. Very few Germans knew what was going on. Very few. None of us knew what was happening. The place is shown on these films. None of us.
And then he says that Janning tried to mitigate some of this stuff. That he protected people, including his own physician who was a Jew.
Right.
And now we go back to the Fedelstein case, and he calls a witness. And the witness is a cleaning lady, and she says that she saw Fedelstein kissing Irene, the Judy Garland character. And he saw them together all the time.
Sitting on his lap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Lawson cross-examines, says, asks her, were you a Nazi? And she says, yes, we're all Nazis. When did you become a Nazi? 1933. Well, you weren't forced. And again, so he's trying to discredit the witness by saying, well, you're a Nazi, you're part of that. But I don't think it's that easy.
But he's also trying to discredit this argument that they all didn't know, or they just went along with it.
Yeah.
You weren't forced to do it. When he says that, you weren't forced. That's his condemnation of people who are saying, well, we had no choice.
Well, and it's also, again, I'm telling you, it's the frog in the boiling water, because just because a politician says they're going to do a particular thing, maybe when they're running for office in 1932, doesn't mean you really believe they're going to do that.
Right.
You know? So when Hitler says we're going to kill all the Jews, everyone goes, ha, 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 yeah. Most people, I don't think, believe they're going to be concentration camps.
Yeah.
And when other politicians say they're going to kick everybody out of the country, people maybe don't believe them.
Yeah.
But maybe we should, you know? And what does now Maximilian Schell do? He calls back Irene Hoffman.
Yeah.
This is really rough. Because he does to her, essentially, what Hahn did to her in the first trial.
Remember, it was brought out at the tribunal that Mr. Feldstein bought you things. Candy and cigarettes.
Yes.
Remember that sometimes he bought you flowers?
Yes, he bought me many things. That was because he was kind. He was the kindest man I ever knew.
Did you sit on his lap?
Yes, but there wasn't nothing wrong or ugly about it.
Did you sit on his lap?
Yes, but...
You sat on his lap! What else did you do?
There was nothing that you're trying to say. There was nothing like that.
What else did you do, Mrs. Wallner?
What are you trying to do? Are you trying to... Why
we want, Mrs. Wallner. The truth, the truth.
Which leads to my favorite moment in the movie. Because he is essentially cross-examining her back, making her relive the whole situation. And Judy Garland, incredible performance here.
Yeah.
Exactly the same as Montgomery Clift. Kudos to Stanley Kramer for casting both of them in these parts. And maybe he knew what they would bring to these parts. Her gasp cries, her almost, you can see her reliving it again and almost reverting back to being that 16-year-old girl who can't be heard, isn't allowed to speak. No one wants to believe her. And she's like, you stop it. You stop it. Her stutter in those moments is painful and heartbreaking. And at least in my favorite moment, as Maximilian gets more and more fervently attacking her more fervently, finally, Ernst yawning, Burt Lancaster stands up and goes, Herr Rolf!
Stop it! Stop it!
What else do you admit to, Mrs. Wallner? What else?
Hello! Are we going to do this again?
And it is so powerful and so moving, and it stops the train. And even Maximilian Schell, Herr Rolf, is like, doesn't know what to do in that particular moment, and then falls back on this. The client is he doesn't know where he's at. He's lost it. He's not aware. And he goes, I am aware. I am aware. And it's so powerful, man. And I love that moment because once again, it's Burt Lancaster. You have this inherent desire to believe him and find him noble, and he has this noble moment.
Truly noble. Yeah.
Truly noble.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it goes from there. And it lets you know that he knows what he did. He feels guilt for what he did, and he wants to stop it in some way possible here, happening again.
And it goes on the filmmaking level of, if you want this person to have a powerful moment, don't have him speak for an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
You know, if you have this guy sitting quietly, and his presence through this whole sequence is very, and this is again where these non-motivated camera moves and these zoom lenses is like, you are aware of yawning in the background a lot. So you are aware of his silence, and the silence goes on and on and on until he breaks it, and it is profound. And he says, I want to make a statement.
Yes.
And Maximilian Schell is very quick on his feet, and he says, oh, no, we're not. And Widmark is going, no, you got to let him talk. You got to let him talk. And again, it's the choice of Spencer Tracy, and he chooses essentially to side with Maximilian Schell and adjourn the court.
For Yawning's own behalf, right? Because he kind of thinks for him, going like, he may make a statement that may ruin him in a moment of emotion. Give him time. I respect him. Maybe a night thinking about what he's going to say.
I would say it's not in Yawning's behalf, and it's not in Rolf's behalf. It is on behalf of justice.
Well, fair.
You know.
And also probably Irene Hoffman.
Good point. Yeah. Good point. And Max goes to talk to Yawning, and it's great.
You think I have enjoyed being defense counsel during this trial? There were things I had to do in that courtroom that made me cringe. Why did I do them? Because I want to leave the German people something. I want to leave them a shred of dignity. I want to call a halt to these proceedings. If we allow them to discredit every German like you, we lose the right to rule ourselves forever. We have to look at the future. We can't look back now. Do you want the Americans to stay here forever? Do you want that? I could show you a picture of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thousands and thousands of burned bodies, women and children. Is that their superior morality?
What an incredible argument to make,
Not
Steve,
a bad argument.
in 1961. What an incredible argument to make.
Yeah. And then Max says, what can I say to make you see? And he says, there is nothing you can say. So Bert, we talked about this gravitas thing. Bert's got it.
He really does, man.
He's a lot.
And you can tell that's the grizzled veteran talking to the rookie actor.
Yeah.
It's the grizzled veteran actor talking to the rookie actor. It's great. Yeah. It's so great.
And now we hear that the Berlin crisis is growing, and this is obviously, this is 1946, and this is the Berlin crisis is the beginning of the Cold War.
Yes.
That's really happening. And we're back with the judges, and in comes our senator, who we had met at the very beginning of the movie. And I love when he says, I'm not trying to influence you.
Yeah, as a senator would politically say.
But basically he says, we really need these German people to be happy.
Yeah.
Anything that starts with, I'm not trying to influence you, is like, I'm bullshitting you now. And we get back for yawning statement.
Mm-hmm.
It is important, not only for the tribunal to understand it, but for the whole German people. But in order to understand it, one must understand the period in which it happened. There was a fever over the land, a fever of disgrace, of indignity, of hunger. Above all, there was fear. Fear of today, fear of tomorrow, fear of our neighbors, and fear of ourselves. Only when you understand that can you understand what Hitler meant to us. Because he said to us, lift your heads, be proud to be German. There are devils among us, communists, liberals, Jews, gypsies. Once these devils will be destroyed, your misery will be destroyed.
You know, you wait a whole movie to deliver a monologue. It better be a good one.
Damn right.
And it is.
Yeah.
It is.
What about those of us who knew better? We who knew the words were lies and worse than lies? Why did we sit silent? Why did we take part? Because we loved our country. What difference does it make if a few political extremists lose their rights? What difference does it make if a few racial minorities lose their rights? It is only a passing phase. It is only a stage we are going through. It will be discarded sooner or later. Hitler himself will be discarded sooner or later.
Is he convincing to you?
Absolutely. I think convincing in this way. I believe that he believes what he's saying. That's what I would say. He doesn't convince me to forgive him or convince me that he's absolved of his guilt. But I believe that he believes what he's saying.
I absolutely believe that he believes what he's saying.
Yeah.
I also, this is a big rationalization. Because he, even within it, he says, you know, because we loved our country, what difference if a few extremists and minorities lose their rights?
Yeah.
You're a judge, man. You know?
But he's not saying it to rationalize what he's not saying like he believes this. He's saying this, so what did it matter if he's saying it from a place of guilt. He knows that this was his logical reasoning, and this logical reasoning is incorrect. So he's almost ridiculing himself for having believed this. And I think that's why he's saying the way he's saying it. So what did it matter if people? It's him chastising the regime and himself for going along with it.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I agree. And you know, and he does say this thing of it was going to be a passing phase. What was going to be a passing phase had become a way of life.
Yeah.
Whew. I'm telling you, it's the frog in the boiling water. Slowly but surely, you look around and you go, "What happened to my country?
Right?
How did we get here?"
My counsel would have you believe we were not aware of the concentration camps. Not aware. Where were we? Where were we when Hitler began shrieking his hate in the Reichstag? Where were we when our neighbors were being dragged out in the middle of the night to Dachau? Where were we when every village in Germany has a railroad terminal where cattle cars were filled with children being carried off to their extermination? Where were we when they cried out in the night to us? Were we deaf, dumb, blind?
I'm really going is this Burt Lancaster's best performance?
I think you can certainly make an argument and a case for it, because everything else he always relies on his tricks. His leading man stuff.
Yeah.
But in this, and I would agree, this is everyone's maybe greatest performance.
Yeah.
Montgomery Clift, Judy Garland included. Just amazing. Whereas Gene Kelly sticks out like a sore thumb in Inherit the Wind, Judy Garland and Montgomery Clift are incredibly powerful in their parts here. Yeah.
Interesting that they're both kind of stunt casting in the way that Gene Kelly is. And yet in this case, it just totally works. Gene Kelly was I don't know, his character in Inherit the Wind is not that, he's supposed to be sort of light. And,
sure.
Whereas these are heavy characters to come in and do.
But his character it just doesn't fit. His character fits, he doesn't fit portraying it. There we go.
And Han calls him a traitor.
Yeah.
And
traitor.
Yeah.
I love that.
He's a good actor.
He really is.
Really
I know he is.
And he's just, I'm going to tell them the truth. And then he lays it out.
Werner Lampe, an old man who profited by the property expropriation of every man he sent to a concentration camp. Friedrich Hofstetter, the good German who knew how to take orders, who sent men before him to be sterilized like so many digits. Emil Hahn, the decayed, corrupt bigot, obsessed by the evil within himself. And Ernst Janning, worse than any of them, because he knew what they were, and he went along with them. Ernst Janning, who made his life excrement, because he walked with them.
What do you think about that, Steve? Because throughout the whole film, he's been elitist with these people. How can he feel elitist when he's done what he's done with them?
I think he's still being fucking elitist.
There it is.
Because he says, oh, I made myself, I became excrement because of you.
Right.
It's like, no, you fucking did it on your own.
It's self-aggrandizing.
Yeah.
You're
He's
right.
like, oh, I'm still awesome, but I hung around with shitty people.
Right.
It's like, no, you were the minister of justice. You were the shitty people's boss.
Exactly.
You know, again, most people follow what the world they're presented with. If he had stood up more, they wouldn't have been so shitty. Why'd you have these shitty people working for you?
It's that kind of noble attempt at being forgiven nobly, right? Like I know that I turned my life into shit. I know that I did this or this is, but I'm still me. You know, please forgive me because I know what I did to myself. And it's like, no. You don't still get to be this noble person when you're trying to get yourself forgiven for something. You were terrible, and you did. And you're right, Steve. He was their boss. He should have known better.
Yeah. Well, you know, we talked about this over and over again because it's come up in a lot of films.
Yeah.
We're still always trying to construct the world so we look better than we want. You know.
Very true.
And so's he. Even in the moment of his most abject admission of his guilt, he's still trying to look pretty cool.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And he goes and sits down, and there's a long moment of them kind of getting out of his way. And Max doesn't know how to follow this.
Yeah.
Takes his glasses off. And he starts off with, you know, it's a tough conundrum for an attorney. It's my duty to defend him, and yet he says he's guilty. And then he goes into this argument. And this argument says it's basically if he's guilty, aren't we all guilty?
Yes.
What about the rest of the world? Did it not know the intentions of the Third Reich? Did it not hear the words of Hitler's broadcast all over the world? Did it not read his intentions in Mein Kampf, published in every corner of the world? Where's the responsibility of the Soviet Union, who signed in 1939 the pact with Hitler, enabled him to make war? Are we now to find Russia guilty? Where's the responsibility of the world leader Winston Churchill, who said in an open letter to the London Times in 1938, 1938, Your Honor, were England to suffer national disaster, I should pray to God to send a man of the strength of mind and will of an Adolf Hitler. Are we now to find Winston Churchill guilty? Where's the responsibility of those American industrialists who helped Hitler to rebuild his armaments and profited by that rebuilding? Are we now to find the American industrialists guilty?
It is essentially the same argument, and maybe this is too light to bring up in such a heavy movie, that Otter makes at Animal House in the defense. If our fraternity is guilty, then isn't the fraternity system guilty? Isn't the whole education system guilty?
Right.
You were saying the American system is guilty. Well, I'm not going to stand here and let you badmouth the United States of America. That's kind of the argument he's making.
It is. And both of them are completely incorrect arguments to make.
I mean, yes, is there a point where you can go, America knew some of the things that were going on? And, you know, there's things we can be guilty about.
Sure.
We were sending Jewish refugees away from our shores back to Europe at this time.
Yep.
We should feel guilty about that.
Sure.
But that is not the same as being the judge there.
We claim ignorance all the time when people talk about that time. We claim ignorance. Even though we had Japanese concentration camps, nobody fucking talks about that, do they?
No.
They do plays. They do to try to bring light to it. George Takei is one of these big activists about it to highlight it because he lived in it. And they've done occasional movies, but it's something that we don't want to confront, but we don't mind pointing out other countries' issues in our movies.
Yeah, and this guilt thing's tough. Yeah. Particularly when you look at big countries like the United States, there's going to be stuff. But the argument of saying, it's like if I break something and I turn around and go, well, you've broken stuff too. You're just as guilty as me. Right. It's like, no, I broke that. That's my responsibility. You can't just go, oh, we all make mistakes. And, that's not.
It's really your fault. You know I break stuff. Why did you leave stuff lying around that I could break? Yeah.
So we go back with the generals, and now we're really into the Berlin airlift, and now the general, Lawson's boss, kind of says, what are you going to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
And this is where the pressure is coming. Yeah. He's basically saying, don't prosecute these Germans that hard.
Right.
Because we need them. Right. And Lawson is saying, I'm going to go for the limit. And the general says, who do you think you're talking to?
And he calls him by his name.
Yeah.
Yeah. No rank. He calls him by his name.
Well, and this is a problem. This is a problem that we've had many times since then. We had this problem in Vietnam. We certainly had this problem with Iraq, which is if you take the people who've been running the country out, the country falls apart.
Yep.
And so do you let people that have maybe done some bad stuff stay somewhat in charge of their country in order to keep things going, or do you prosecute them all to the end of the law and possibly the country's going to fall apart? It's not an easy decision at all.
No. Welcome to world politics. You can't solve it in 140 characters on Twitter.
Yeah, or in a 3-hour. Well, they've gone up to 280 characters, so I think we're going to be good.
No, they're only beta testing that.
Oh, they're beta testing.
Right, and only celebrities get that, apparently.
By the way, the last script I wrote has a point that is completely dependent on the 140 character limit. There's a plot point. I'm like, fuck,
shit.
I'm going to have to change that.
Oh, shit.
We're back to the summation. Lawson really struggles to give it and kind of rests without maybe going full on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he listened to the general.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Him playing ball, too, as a military man, he has to follow his orders as well.
Yeah. And that feels weird. Feels really weird. And then each of the defendants get to make a statement.
Yeah.
Hans is maybe the best, where she says,
Your Honors, I do not evade the responsibility for my actions. On the contrary, I stand by them before the entire world. But I will not follow the policy of others. I will not say of our policy today that it was wrong when yesterday I say it was right. Germany was fighting for its life. Certain measures were needed to protect it from its enemies. I cannot say that I am sorry we applied those measures. We were a bulwark against Bolshevism. We were a pillar of Western culture. A bulwark and a pillar the West may yet wish to retain.
and each of them kind of make their small statements. Yawning doesn't need to make a statement.
No.
He's good.
And the poor old guy who's so flustered and flabbergasted can't even muster words.
Well, and I think the film of Buchenwald broke him.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that I don't think he did know.
Mm-hmm. I think he was too stupid to know. I think that's what you get, is that he's in his position, but he's one of these people that's too simplistic to explore what he's really doing.
Well, and
right? It doesn't absolve him.
Of course.
Just saying.
Well, and honestly, I don't see how anybody could have, unless you were there. It's so unbelievable what they did.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you knew that terrible, terrible things were happening.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could have imagined what was actually happening. How terrible. We go back with the judges, and they're having a kind of legal discussion about international law and how the international law works, and they can't be prosecuted for obeying their country's law and blah, 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 blah. And Tracy's just looking out the window. Yeah.
I know.
And they kind of say, "Aren't you interested?" But his response is, they say, "Aren't you interested?" And what his response is, "How am I supposed to look the other way at the death of 6 million?" And this is the thing. Mm-hmm. Again, we go back to this thing we mentioned before of, are there things so evil that the rule of law has to take second place?
Yeah.
And I really like the rule of law. That's really, really important to me. How are they not responsible for their acts?
Right.
All right, it's time for the verdict.
Just because it's politically expedient doesn't mean it's the correct thing to do.
Correct? Yeah. Well, you just said a mouthful. There's a lot there. Time for the verdict. Marlena's there. And Tracy makes a statement.
Yeah.
It's like a 8-minute something long speech. He did it in one take.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you can say what Hopkins did at the end of Amistad, almost in one take, rivals that too. It's just amazing, yeah.
And he goes through the case, and he really cites the things that Rolf, Maximilian Schell's character, said that are, yes, you're right, and that we do share responsibility. And you said that Janning was a good jurist, and you were right. And then he says the thing which you alluded to at the very beginning, which is,
Janning's record and his fate illuminate the most shattering truth that has emerged from this trial. If he and all of the other defendants had been degraded perverts, if all of the leaders of the Third Reich had been sadistic monsters and maniacs, then these events would have no more moral significance than an earthquake or any other natural catastrophe. But this trial has shown that under a national crisis, ordinary, even able and extraordinary men can delude themselves into the commission of crimes so vast and heinous that they beggar the imagination. No one who has sat through the trial can ever forget them.
And he even says there are people in our own country today who speak of protection of a country's survival.
Yeah.
Yeah. A decision must be made in the life of every nation when the grasp of the enemy is at its throat. And I would add to that, even when the perception that the grasp of an enemy is at its throat. Because the reality is, in America today, there is no enemy at our throat.
Right.
And yet many people feel that there is.
They create one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he goes into this, we have to survive at any means necessary. Survival as what? This is what is our nation? There's a great quote from Winston Churchill where in the midst of the war, they're saying we need to stop giving any money to the arts. And Churchill says, well, then what are we fighting for?
Right, exactly.
What is our nation?
I wish more people understood that.
And
you can't go watch silos and weapons on stage.
No.
People need escape. People need lessons. People need
meaning.
To see that there are other meaning. Yes, exactly.
Well, and if America doesn't have the rule of law, if America doesn't have the right to freedom of speech and freedom of religion, if America doesn't have values, then we're just a place that a bunch of people live in.
Right.
That's not what America is these values, is these ideals. Without them, we're just a rock, as Spencer Tracy says. It's time for the sentences. Each of the guys rise. Life, 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 life.
Yeah.
The general is shocked.
He just doesn't get it.
Yeah.
He just doesn't get it. That's what he says over and over again. He just doesn't get it.
Yeah. Widmark is shocked. Marlene Dietrich is crying. Maximilian Schell is shocked. There's a dissenting opinion.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And he just says this issue can only be decided in history. Which is a fair point. And that's the end of the case. So Spencer Tracy is packing up. It's time to go. Has a little goodbye with Shatner.
Who says, you owe me one, because his judgment caused him to lose the German girlfriend he had at the time. Yeah, through the whole movie.
A very small plot, but a good one.
It's there, but it matters because it evokes the anger the German people felt at his decision, because they all
That's exactly
want to
right.
move
That's
on.
a great point.
Yeah.
She
represents the people.
Because they feel that he condemned the German people.
Right.
Servant brings him some strudel, so I guess he's... I can go for some strudel now, by the way. It's delicious. He asks about Marlene. He calls Marlena. She doesn't answer.
She will not pick up. I love that shot in the darkness with once again, the picture of him looming over her, just staring at the phone.
And who shows up but Herr Rolf?
Which is great to give this scene to Maximilian Schell.
Agreed. Because he needs a moment. We have to finish. We have to have a final moment with him.
We have to see him outside the courtroom.
Yeah. And by the way, and there's no question that Tracy admires him.
He says it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did incredible work in the courtroom. It was marvelous to watch you work.
Yeah. Well, and that is the job of the lawyer.
Yep.
The lawyer's job is to... And he believed in what he was doing.
Yes.
Although there's no sense you have that he was believed in what the Nazis did.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, right. Yeah, he does get into it a bit. Yeah,
if you can use the same tactics.
And then what he says is that Yanni wishes to see him.
Yeah.
He also predicts that that those people are all going to get off with life sentences.
Mm-hmm.
They're all going to get out. They're going to get out earlier than life sentences. And Tracy says to be logical is not to be right.
Yes. Which
okay, Tracy and Lancaster in the prison.
Man, what a scene.
And Lancaster gives him the records of his cases because he wants to give them to someone he can trust.
Once again, this vain attempt at being seen as this noble, this better than person. But in that moment, in that scene, he reduces himself to the same level as these guys who were there being tried with him, and all his nobility disappears in this desperate attempt to kiss his own ass and retain his vanity.
Because he wants to believe that he was a good man deep down.
Yeah.
He still was a good man. And even that he has a relationship to Spencer Tracy's character.
There feels a kinship.
Yeah. They're both judges. They're both good judges.
Right.
Those people. Those millions of people. I never knew it would come to that. You must believe it. You must believe it.
And then the final line.
Hey, Yana. It came to that the first time you sentenced a man to death you knew to be innocent.
Such a line.
Yeah.
Man.
And you see Lancaster's face.
Just deflate.
Yeah.
Just deflate.
And that is the punishment.
Yes.
Because that thing that he was holding on to, I became excrement because I walked with you. Here are my records. I want to give them to someone who I can trust. He just destroyed that.
Yes.
No, bullshit. You don't get to hide behind that anymore.
He wanted the judge's respect as a fellow judge, and the judge punished him by not giving it to him. And that is more punishment than any prison time he'll ever serve.
And what do we hear as Tracy leaves the prison?
The music.
Singing.
Yep.
The German singing. And the final thing we see is that text comes on the screen and says, not one person sentenced to prison time is still in jail.
Right. And that was 1961.
Yeah. Yanning's prediction came true.
And when you go back and I've read the history on this, because obviously Ernst Young is not true. It's it's
based on other people.
Yeah, it's based on other people. It's a culmination of people. But none of them served more than 5 years or 8 years from the sentences that they were given, and they were released. And a lot of them went on to live very full lives in Germany until ripe old ages.
Yeah.
And were given pensions by the government to live on for the rest of their lives. Amazing.
Well, what do you do? I mean, what do you do to a nation? I mean, that does what Germany did in World War II.
Well, it's tough because how can you judge? How can you, who the majority of the government that was left there had sided with the Nazis, how can you judge other people who had carried out orders of the Nazis when you yourself had done the same thing? Right, I liken it to the scene in Untouchables when Costner comes in near the end and the judge switches juries because he tells him his name's on the ledger, and he goes, well, his name's not on the ledger, and he just stares at him because the judge knows from his own guilt that he did do things to compromise himself for Capone. And so in that moment, he's switching the jurors out to kind of show that as well. And I think this is the same moment here. It's like, how can you judge other people who did the same things you did? So,
well, and it goes to a thing where it's like, I do think it's important for us to contemplate this story.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible to come out. Anyone who comes out and says, I know the answer, that person isn't really thinking about it.
No, not really.
It's just too hard.
Yeah.
So, what are your final thoughts on Judgment at Nuremberg?
But first, I want to say one last thing about the film. Did it get what awards did it win? What did it do? Any research? Like, what is it nominated for Best Picture?
It's nominated for Best Picture.
Yes.
Maximilian Schell won.
Yes.
And he and Spencer Tracy, I believe, were both nominated for Best Actor.
That
so
makes
he
sense.
beats Spencer Tracy for Best Actor. It doesn't win Best Picture, and it wins a couple of other awards, but I can't remember which wins.
Okay. But it's a good film.
Yes.
They got Oscar nominated.
Yeah.
And that's important. That matters.
Yeah.
This is a very difficult. My final thoughts are this. This is a film that even now, as we relive it again for the Cine-Files, there are episodes where we do, Steve, where we relive movies, and I feel their weight all over again, and this is absolutely one of them. And I love talking about this movie. I love watching this movie, and it's a film that I absolutely recommend if you've never seen it, or you're listening to us for the first time, or you're listening about this movie for the first time. I can't stress to you enough how much you will learn about filmmaking watching this movie, and acting watching this movie, and also about the history of the world. And we must never forget, even though this happened in the 40s, 7 decades ago, we see shades of it currently happening in our country now again, in our own country. And that is important. We must never forget. And that's what this film, I think, is really trying to tell us, is this verdict by Spencer Tracy is we must never forget, and we must always do what is logical, not what is necessary, or what is right, not necessarily logical, right? Is we have to do the right thing. And I think that's what is important to hear, because the judgment was the right thing for him to do. And so we have to always be aware of it. So I think it's a great, almost like a time capsule movie that you can go back and relive this whole World War II, what was going on with the Holocaust, what was going on. It's very important stuff that's happening during that time, and understand the complexity of man, the complexity of what they can do to themselves in this fervent pursuit for power and also for nationalism. It's a cautionary tale, this film, as it still echoes in importance today.
Wow. It's interesting that you said never forget, because the phrase that, of course, was going through my mind throughout watching this movie is never again.
Yeah.
And never again, when I was a little kid, I was raised with that, never again. And it's a thing that Jews have said since the Holocaust, never again. It's the slogan of the Anti-Defamation League. It's written on Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel, never again. And there's something that happened about a year ago that made me think about this in a different way, which was, on Facebook, I have lots of friends, family members, friends that I grew up with, parents of friends that I grew up with who are Jewish. And as everyone knows from Facebook, we don't all share the same worldview.
Right.
And I remember there's a, International Holocaust Memorial Day. And on that day, a lot of Jews that I knew were posting things remembering the Holocaust. And you'd see these words, never again, quite a bit. And there's one woman in particular who posted a bunch of very powerful things about the Holocaust and wrote those words, never again, under them. And then right after that, the next post was about Sharia law taking over the United States. And the next post was about, we have to expel all Muslims. They're evil people. They're bent on destroy us. They're sex deviants. They're all these things. They're killers. And I couldn't reconcile that. Like, how could you post that in one line and in the next sentence, the same day, the same moment, post this hateful thing towards Muslims? And what I realized, it took me a long time. I really thought about it. And what I realized was that what she meant by never again and what I mean is not the same thing. Is that what I mean, or what I was raised to believe, is that the idea is never again should this happen to anyone.
Yes.
And what she means is never again should it happen to us.
Yeah.
And even though it's only 2 words that are different, us to anyone, the meaning is almost entirely the opposite.
Yeah.
Because never again should this happen to us is based on fear.
Yeah.
And it's based on fear and pride. The idea that I am important and that other people are trying to destroy me is exactly the idea that gave Hitler power.
Yeah.
And it frightened me to read this, to think this about this person who I've known all my life. And what I realized is that never again isn't just about keeping the Jews from getting killed, although that's part of it. It means turning on your perception to the world and looking out for injustice where it happens anywhere. So it means looking to the Armenian Holocaust and saying never again. It means looking to Somalia and saying never again, Darfur and saying never again. It means looking today to Myanmar, to Syria and saying never again. And it means turning that lens of attention onto yourself and looking at the extermination of Native Americans and saying never again, and slavery and saying never again, and Jim Crow and saying never again, and the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II and saying never again. And it means looking today at Muslims and immigrants, because that lens of fear has been put on them, and today saying never again.
Yeah. Very powerfully said, Steve. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what we think of Judgment of Nuremberg. And normally we give you some advertising and talk about Facebook pages and Twitter accounts and iTunes, and I don't want to do that today because I think we've talked about that something that's really important, and let's just leave it with that. Okay. Good with you, John?
Yeah, that works for me.
All right, so that's it for this week. We're going to see you next time on the Cine-Files.